Hi there, Kelsey Toner here from Be a Better Guide, and I have the distinct pleasure to be sitting down once again with a very successful tour and activity business entrepreneur, this time all the way from Rome. This is Kenny Dunn from Eating Europe. Kenny, thanks for taking the time to chat today.
My pleasure. I'm glad I could be here.
Cool. So as I was saying, just before we started recording, I met Kenny recently at a conference, and very much enjoyed hanging out with him, and it was actually at a food tour conference. So I don't have as much background on your business as I have for some of the other folks. So I'm just as excited to learn. And the very first question, of course, is can you talk at first kind of a snapshot of where you are right now, the types of tours you lead, and for those who don't know, where you are based in Europe?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm personally based here in Rome, where I'm talking to you from. Our company, though, operates in 6 cities in Europe. So Eating Europe has operations here in Rome and Florence within Italy, Paris, London, Amsterdam, and Prague. And the kind of activities we run, food tours and experiences, as we refer to them. So those are kind of short 2 to 4 hour walking, food and cultural tours. We do some tours that kind of focus around the market or on a theme, like a wine and food stroll. We have several beer tours, one in London as well as one in Prague. Those are all our B2C products. I think today we're going to be talking a bit about the B2B market. So we also have kind of a range of parallel tours that we offer exclusively to B2B clients, usually bigger groups, similar in nature, but just the logistics are unique compared to our small group B2C tours.
Yeah, fantastic. To continue to give us a sense of the kind of size and scale of the operation, about how many staff and tour leaders would you have? I know peak season is obviously a very different number, but maybe we'll go with that.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of staff, we have around 15 people. We're a pretty decentralized company, just being in so many different locations. We're kind of all spread out. And then tour leaders, somewhere around 60. Like you said, it kind of fluctuates seasonally.
Mm-hmm. And just ballpark approximate annual revenues, or as much as you're comfortable sharing in terms of the size you are now. And of course, we'll work backwards because I'm sure I know you weren't always there.
Yeah. We do around 4 million in sales. And we haven't always been here. So.
Yeah.
I didn't say at the top, we started in 2011. So this is finishing up our 7th year, of operations.
That's so fantastic, and congrats on the success you've had and for continued similar success. I know there's folks who are listening who they've maybe been in their business a similar amount of time, and they're saying, hey, I'd love to get to that degree of growth, or they're thinking about expanding their operations. Let's go back in time. I'm detecting that, your Roman accent is a little distinct. I don't know if that's a part of, the North or Tuscany accent. What's your story? How did you end up over there?
Yeah, I've been practicing prior to our call my American accent for the last.
It's spectacular.
Really. And I appreciate that because a lot of hard work has gone into that. So it's nice to get that kind of feedback. So this American accent has been with me for about 40 some years. I'm originally from the States, from Philadelphia. So my story is I moved to Rome back in 2008. And was doing other things. And then in 2011, like I said, I kind of found myself without work and I've had other businesses. I've always been very entrepreneurial and kind of discovered this concept, which is a food tour, a business in New York, Scott's Pizza Tours. I always like plugging Scott because he's just amazing in what he does. And I had been on his tour and came back to Rome, and suddenly it was one of those moments where it just was, wow, this is something I could do here. I didn't do a pizza tour per se, but a food tour. And I've always been very interested in food, have worked in food, have also done a lot around performance and then also marketing. And so this concept kind of brought all those things together. And so in 2011, started the first tour, just myself, a one-man band in the neighborhood I was living in. And it's been a wild ride since then. So that's kind of my story.
That's fantastic. I know there's a lot of people, and you probably hear from some of the Arrival folks, people who are studying the industry, that, hey, food tours are really hot right now. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of traction. For us in the Online Tourism Academy at Be a Better Guide, we're always encouraging tour leaders to move beyond using one or two senses. Usually sight and sound is where tour leaders typically shine, but being able to engage taste and touch and smell in the way that a food tour does really brings a lot to the tour. If there are folks who are considering this space, or maybe they have more traditional type tours, what advice might you have for some of the unique complexities of a food tour?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to kind of underline what you said, I think the concept of a food tour is just really a winning recipe, no pun intended. I mean, I think the guys in New York, Foods in New York, get credit for kind of creating it. And it's something that people do love for all the reasons you said. And it's also a bit of culture. It's kind of understanding how people live in a certain city or country. And so I think the concept is really successful. I mean, it's over and over again. And it's not just in great food cities like Rome. I mean, there's folks in American cities like Milwaukee or, I don't know, you name it, where you might not even Orlando. What do you eat in Orlando? Well, I mean, just the idea of bringing people together and kind of eating great food and learning about the food in a city, even if the city doesn't have kind of its own cuisine, can work. So I guess all of that is to say, no matter where you are, I think this concept could be successful. The other side to that coin is, unlike some of the businesses I know you work with, adventure tourism, where you need to invest in equipment, let's say kayaks or river rafts or, a lot of things which create a barrier to entry. Food tours, there really is none. So it kind of works both ways. If you are considering adding this to an existing business or getting into this business from square one, there's not too much you need to invest in terms of capital to actually go from zero to operational. On the other hand, it's invited a lot of people. It's become very quickly a quite crowded space, even in the 7 or 8 years that I've been involved. And so, I think then it becomes a question of, how are you performing in marketing? How are you differentiating yourself? Are you able to kind of, what's your branding like? Are you getting cut through in a very crowded marketplace? So I think, and that ultimately I think is the biggest challenge, because if you have an interest in food, as so many people do, coming up with a good food tour, I think, is a very attainable, very achievable objective. But if it's a crowded marketplace, then, a lot of other variables other than your product are going to impact how successful you are.
Yeah, it is the continued double-edged sword of being, imagine, in a city like Rome, where you're fortunate in so many ways to have an incredible number of tourists coming through, but that also invites a very serious level of competition, no doubt. So
Absolutely.
So we can talk about that in just a second, but to continue to highlight that for folks, if you are in a place where there isn't an existing food tour or a food themed tour, again, we kind of use those terms generally because what I found attending the food tour conference is you can really have that be as creative as you want to be. You know, I went on, I think I told you, Kenny, but When Pigs Fry, which is a bacon themed food tour in Toronto, of all places, that nicely wove some of the history of Toronto, which is obviously based on immigration. We had some wonderful kind of Italian ham, and then there's this whole story of pea meal bacon, which is part of the official food. Anyway, just to say, you don't necessarily go to Toronto for a bacon food tour, like you said in Milwaukee, but whatever that, either it's a passion of yours or maybe it's it could be something as simple as the best coffee shops or the best X, Y, or Z, or there really is a lot in terms of coming up with a package, something that's going to sell. Maybe your favorite restaurants would sell, but I think a lot of people, by putting a little bit of thought into your unique value proposition, coming up with an offer that's especially compelling is really where you can have the kind of success.
And just to provide one more example that's not food related, and you may have seen this presentation at Arrival. It's a food tour in Georgia where, she kind of based it all around kind of Black heritage and Martin Luther King. And, it's just done a wonderful job of kind of taking this, history that's so important to the United States and, has a real home in Atlanta, and kind of weaving a food tour through that history, and has been tremendously successful. So, there's a lot of different takes on kind of this concept.
Sure. Any insights? That's one of, I think it's Atlanta Food Walks or Atlanta Food Tours.
Atlanta Food Walks.
Yeah, so you should give them a Google and see how they've done nice blending. Any insights after doing this for a number of years in terms of working with your sort of subcontractors? For people who are coming away from maybe a traditional walking tour, there is a degree of added complexity. You obviously have to work with a lot of the restaurants and or places that you're visiting. Any advice or maybe even some mistakes you made early on, and how you think about working with your subcontractors in this type of tour? There's been plenty of mistakes. Real quick, so Atlanta Food Walks, and that's Akila who's there. I just couldn't think of her name, and I feel bad because I've known her for a long time. So to answer your question, I think, in any business, there's so many lessons learned. But if we're really talking about kind of the product development piece, putting together the tour, I think, one thing I would say is, basic business principles like your margins. Something that I've kind of learned over the years is, that's the lifeline of your business, in that cash is, and the amount of cash you have is, directly related to how strong your margins are. So I think there might be a tendency, or there was in our case, to try and kind of, we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll do that, and it's okay if the margin, if it's not as profitable as we want, we'll figure that out later. And sometimes it's kind of harder to go back and try and renegotiate things or change something that's already successful. So I think the creative piece that we just talked about is kind of, especially for the kind of people that this industry attracts, that's the easy one. How do all these great places to choose from, these great foods to showcase, whether it's on a theme like bacon or something else. But, you really have to also have that other hat on, which is, what am I going to price this at? If so, what's my budget here? Because otherwise you can find yourself creating the best product in the world and maybe even selling it really well, and realizing that at the end of the day, there's not a lot of money
a lot of profit to show for it. So that's
you can do a lot of work, a tremendous amount of work, but with not much to show for it at the end, which in the ideal world, in the growth stage, you want to then be able to turn around and drive back into your business.
Yeah, and it's the same amount of work. So it's like, you can make 50, 60%, or you can make 30, 40, but you're doing the same amount of work. So you might as well try and reap as much benefit as possible. And then the other thing I would just say, which is kind of general, and this has been said many times, and I fully agree with it, which is, your partners, those restaurants and shops and food trucks or what it may be, those are really, those are just the critical relationships in this kind of business, because, your business runs through their businesses. And, I've heard some people say that they look at them as their number one customer, and then the actual people who go on the tour, their guests, are kind of secondary. Mm-hmm. And, whether it's even or not, I would just say you need to hold them up in the same way as you do your customer, because without them, then unfortunately with the food tour, you don't have a business unless you already own a lot of restaurants and food trucks and you're just doing a tour of your own establishments, which I've never heard of. So if you're like the rest of us, those partners are essential. So really keep that in mind from day one.
As you're thinking back and looking, did you have a plan to grow quickly, or did you find you just kind of had a couple of hits or a runaway tour and you said, we should do another one? How did you think about growth and expansion? And I'm assuming your first decision wasn't necessarily to expand to another city. What was your some of those initial stages?
We launched a few different tours within Rome. I think it was a bit of both. I mean, there was when I first started, I wasn't really looking beyond Rome, in kind of the initial, let's say, version 1 of the business plan. Although from the beginning, I will say, you go to conferences like the one we met at, there's a lot of people who are in this business just kind of, they like doing it on the side for fun, and they don't have the ambition to really scale up. So, and I think that's great. And, and other people who are doing these kind of things now on Airbnb experiences or other platforms, they're creating a food tour and just selling it through a platform like that. So I do know that from day one, the idea was to scale it. I wasn't really looking at a multi-city model. And that was a couple years in when I started looking. I travel a lot in Europe, and I saw some opportunities where it seemed like there was some, big cities that had, great numbers in terms of tourists and, all the other kind of metrics with either no one there or very little competition. And it seemed like, we could replicate it. So we tried it in one city and that went pretty well, and then tried it somewhere else. And
what was the second city? Was that in Italy?
The second city was actually London.
London, yeah.
Which was an interesting, challenge or different, I should say, than Rome, because it's not a food city. It gets a lot more travelers and tourists and just people of, businesses and companies. Rome pales in comparison to London pretty much by every metric, but it's not a food city. So it was, interesting to see how those two cities have both grown and evolved in unique ways. And as we've kind of gotten into it, we're trying now to, look for the unique opportunities in each city. So, Rome, London, is kind of the financial capital of Europe, and there's just so much business and business travelers, and whereas Rome doesn't have any of that. So, how do we kind of position ourselves to take advantage of what's there?
And I know I want to be sensitive of your time, and I do want to push towards this notion of some of the B2B expansion that you did and working with business owners. Just before we get there, I know people will come after if I don't ask the question of what does your distribution kind of look like, and how does it break out in terms of direct sales and some of your most important channels?
Yeah, I mean, direct sales is still far and away our most important and our biggest channel. And yeah, that's about 80%, between 75 and 80%. And then, like I think most of the people you've probably talked to as part of this series, we do work with the big distribution channels like, Viator and Expedia and Get Your Guide, some being more, sending us a lot more people than others. And then the last channel is the one that you just kind of alluded to, which is, partnerships, corporate business, so team building events. And, in some ways, some of those I think naturally fall under kind of direct, because if you're a company and you find us online, whether you're a company or a family, a couple, still direct business. Some of the other ones are kind of partnerships that are really kind of being born offline at conferences and other networking events. Mm-hmm. And so it's still direct, but it's not an online.
All right. So what's your crash course in terms of what you don't necessarily have to go into what you did initially, but what you would do now if you wanted to build a robust B2B side of things? Here, obviously working with companies, corporations, events. What would be your 3-pronged strategy for somebody who hasn't really considered that world? Obviously, you found it very successful channel in terms of growth in your own business. What would that 3-pronged strategy look like?
Yeah, I think I would say, so there's kind of one part which is kind of inward and 2 parts, or one part inward and one part kind of outward, and I'll explain. So inward, it's kind of looking at your tours that you have, and then really developing a parallel line for kind of B2B. But my video might have went out. So, what we did is for years, let's say for the first 3 or 4 years, we were getting requests, inbound requests. Hi, we're a company, we're looking for a team building event, we're 60 people, 30 people. And we just couldn't accommodate it. Like many businesses in this industry, it's a small tour model where 10, 12, 13, 16 people. So I think the first thing is figuring out what you want to do. Do you want to accommodate groups of 60 people? Do you want to work and play within this kind of team building space, or work with large bus tour operators and be a part of their itinerary? If so, what are the kind of products that you're going to need to create, or how are you going to have to modify the tours you have to be able to play in that space, accommodate? So that's kind of step 1. Step 2 is then, getting out there and trying to sell these products. So I really feel like there's 2 ways to do that. One is kind of the old-fashioned way, which is going to conferences. The World Travel Market was just in London. It wrapped up today. Being there, making appointments, with it could be kind of tour operators and DMCs who are dealing with these large groups, or business travel agencies, companies that are positioned for meetings and conferences, and letting them know, hey, we offer these kind of experiences and we can accommodate these big groups, and this is why we think this would be something that your groups would love, etc. And, getting out there and doing that kind of networking face to face. And then the other thing is online, so it's having a place on your website, trying to do, drip campaigns, using tools like LinkedIn, and that's a whole nother, interview you can do with someone to talk about, how to use LinkedIn to try and kind of get in front of these people. So I think that second prong is really just marketing, and marketing can come in a lot of different ways, and those are kind of the 2 main ways we've tried to do it.
Do you have I assume a dedicated, some dedicated people inside your business who kind of exclusively focus on the business end, whether it is networking at these conferences or, calling people up? Because to me, that was a bit surprising that some of those traditional routes, whether they're inbound tour operators or travel agents or those larger players, oftentimes folks are just looking at some of the businesses or the business opportunities that might exist in their town, because companies of all sizes are looking for things like Christmas parties and team building. But I think that raises an important point too, that once you can essentially start to be able to deal with a coach of people, you can really be tapping into some of these other group tours that are always on the hunt for really great group experiences.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, and we really look at that as two unique opportunities. So one opportunity is all of, that kind of corporate set of, team building events. And I know some companies in the States that really focus on kind of law firms and those kind of professional services. We haven't really gone there. We've been more dealing with kind of big companies, a lot of tech companies and other companies like that. But, so that's kind of one customer segment. Then the other is, tour companies, like you said, these bus tours and any of these existing kind of tour operators that are bringing people into your market. How do you kind of intersect with them? And then something like travel agents, that is actually true B2B, because, you're selling to them and then they're selling to their customers. So that's kind of a unique segment as well. So how do you make sure that anyone who's selling your destination knows that you offer an activity that is really special and unique and could be loved by their customers? So all of those are different. I think the strategies are mostly the same, but it obviously requires targeting them each individually, because they all live in different parts within the kind of ecosystem.
I heard on, I believe it was the panel that you were on, when you were speaking to, you really rapidly get into a world of potentially infinite customization and fluctuating margins and having to make a lot of tough decisions on a per individual basis. And I heard someone say, you really do have to adapt these tours off of your boilerplate tours. 9 times out of 10, it's just not going to work for a substantially larger group. So you need to be creative in how you're going to actually execute. And then someone mentioned, having a kind of a menu of items, 3 to 5, or if you're just starting out, maybe even just 1 or 2 of different experiences where you really do know the numbers, the margins, what it's going to cost to get a vehicle if you're providing it, what it's going to cost to have a private pickup if that's involved. And then, still have some, what I heard was still customized for individual clients a little bit at the margins, but it's not like you're going into these things from scratch every single time. Is that fair?
I think I was, exactly. I think I was commenting on that on the panel, and I think some of my colleagues on there as well spoke to that. And exactly right. I look at it like, there is an industry called, event, being an event management company, and, whether you're doing weddings or other things, and every single event is customized. Just think of weddings. And, you might want to do that. We decided that, that is a lot of work, and, you can drive yourself crazy and spend a lot of time trying to do that. So the more efficient way to do that is to kind of create certain tours that work, to understand who that's going to work for, up until, let's say, the number of people, up until this number of people, or at these specific times. And maybe that's the only thing you can offer for now. And then some people are going to say, we're a group of 400. Sorry, I would love to do it. We're not there now, but I'll follow up. So it's kind of knowing what you can do and what you can't. And if we are talking about a number of tours that you're going to offer, having a system so that the person who is speaking to the client can, has an understanding. Okay, you're looking for this, and that. All right, so we've got either this tour, which is the so-and-so tour, or we've got this other option, and the price of this is something, and the price of something, the other tour is different. And, like you said, customizing around the edges or the margins. So someone says, oh, that sounds great, but our budget is just a little lower. So that's where you can kind of invest a little bit of customization and say, all right, you know what, we can get down to where you need to be. And that might require eliminating a stop, changing a taste, but you're not having to build the thing from scratch. So that, I think, is the key takeaway there.
The notion of just pricing, have you found it's kind of a per head or per person pricing that tends to be the easiest way in terms of corporate pricing? And then do you have higher margins in this sector of your business?
Yeah, generally, yes. I mean, not always, but generally, yeah. And yeah, we do everything down to per person. That's kind of the approach we take. I think, I don't necessarily think you have to do it that way. And, and for us, it kind of starts with, it starts with their budget, and then we kind of know where we want our margins to be. And then that kind of lets us know how much we have to spend, on our cost of goods, which is, the vendors or the rest of the food and the guides. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Just as I see, our time has dwindled mercilessly. For folks who are just enwrapped in this interview, you kind of get the sense of why I wanted to talk to Kenny and why he was so generous in making his time when you're running a business that runs in 6 cities and beyond. There's a lot to do, including picking his little ones up from school. So, Kenny, just as we bring things to a close, I want to emphasize, thank you so much for sharing that. If people
pleasure.
wanted to get in touch, or maybe just learn a little bit more about Eating Europe, what's the best way to get in touch with you or the business, find out more about you online?
Sure. Well, our website is eatingeurope.com, so that's easy. And I am Kenny, Kenny, at eatingeurope.com. So yeah, feel free to reach out. And if I'm not the best person to talk to, then I could certainly put them in touch with someone who could provide whatever information they're looking for. And yeah, this was a total pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to make this happen. And if you wanted to do part 2, we can certainly set that up. But thanks for giving me this opportunity, Kelsey. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, I equally right back at you. Hopefully, maybe with that part 2, I'll investigate how many cities you're in and where you're going. We didn't have much opportunity to explore the big visions, but I can tell you're not you're not done yet.
Yeah, well, we'll see. But yeah, we'll save that. That's a teaser for the sequel.
All right. Thanks so much, Kenny. We'll be in touch. Ciao.
Absolutely.